They laughed behind her back. They rolled their eyes when she walked in the room. But none of them knew the man lying in that hospital bed had the power to change everything. In one of the wealthiest hospitals in the state, a black nurse walked in on her first day, ready to make a difference. What she didn't know was she was about to face the ugliest side of an institution that pretended to be perfect. But this isn't just a story about injustice. This is a story about power, about what happens when the most underestimated person in the room refuses to stay silent, and when the one person watching has the power to burn the whole system down. Stick around, because by the end of this story, the lives of everyone in that hospital, from janitors to surgeons, will never be the same again. Angela Parker stood in front of the mirror, straightening the Navy Mule scrubs she'd ironed twice. She was proud to be here. St. Mary's General wasn't just another hospital. It was the hospital. The kind that made careers. The kind where you had to be better, sharper, faster than everyone else to even get an interview. And she had made it. But as soon as she walked through the staff entrance, the smiles stopped. Her greeting was met with blank stares. One nurse looked her up and down and just kept walking. Her assigned locker wasn't cleaned out. Her orientation buddy never showed. Angela had been in hard rooms before. This wasn't new. She knew how to keep her head down and work. But she could feel it, the difference. Not spoken, not written, but heavy in the air. Like walking into a room where everyone had been talking about you and suddenly went quiet. Then came the voice. "You're late." She turned. Dr. William Greaves. White coat, silver hair, clipboard clutched like a weapon. Not a hello, not a name, just a judgment. Angela blinked. "It's 6:45. I was told to report by 7. He didn't even look up. "Let's hope your clinical skills are better than your punctuality." From that moment it was clear she wasn't going to be given a fair chance. In the following days, Angela's shifts were loaded with tasks no one else wanted. Overflow patients? Hers. Code browns? Hers. Night shifts back-to-back? Also hers. But what stung more than the workload was the way she was treated. "Angela, we don't really do it that way here," one nurse would say, right after she had followed protocol by the book. "I think you misunderstood," a resident muttered, after she calmly corrected a dangerous dosage. And Greaves? He never called her by her name. Only nurse, and always in a tone that made it sound like an insult. Angela kept her head high. She'd been through worse. But the isolation was real. No one sat with her in the break room. Her questions got ignored in staff meetings. Once, she found her notes from a patient chart ripped out and tossed in the bin. And all the while, room 407 stayed quiet. Room 407 had no name on the chart, just Edwards. T. Angela was told he was a long-term VIP recovery, no more details. The man in the bed was quiet, polite. He asked for little, spoke even less, but he watched everything. Angela noticed him watching during her rounds. She thought maybe he was just bored, stuck in recovery after his skiing accident. But there was something sharp behind those eyes, like he was studying the hospital itself. She always treated him the same as any patient, maybe better because he was kind. She brought his meds on time, asked how he slept, even cracked a joke once, which earned the first real smile she'd seen from him. She had no idea who he really was. It happened on a Wednesday, during a routine post-op check. Angela entered OR recovery, scanning vitals on a young patient who'd just come out of surgery. She noticed something off. Vitals unstable. Breathing shallow. She paged the attending. No response. So she did what any good nurse would do. She acted. She alerted the code team, adjusted the oxygen, stabilized fluids, and directed the junior nurse to prep epi just in case. When Dr. Greaves finally arrived, she'd already stabilized the patient, and instead of thanking her, he went off. "Incompetence! You overstepped! You don't call a code unless it's real. Do you understand what protocol is?" The room went silent. Angela didn't respond. She knew if she opened her mouth, it would all come out, years of frustration, exhaustion, rage. So, she swallowed it. But from the hallway, through the cracked door, Thomas Edwards had heard every word. What no one in that hospital, including Dr. Greaves, knew was that the quiet man in 4-7 wasn't just any patient. Thomas Edwards was the CEO of Healthcare United, the very conglomerate that owned St. Mary's General. He wasn't supposed to be recovering here, but he'd chosen this hospital for a reason. Internal whistleblower complaints, rumors of racial bias, high turnover among nurses of color. He wanted to see it for himself, so he came in under a fake name, said nothing, just watched. And Angela? She was the confirmation he didn't want, but needed. She was proof. After the outburst, Edwards made a call, quietly, discreetly, to his office. And then he waited. 2 days passed. Angela kept working like nothing happened, though her smile was a little dimmer. She hadn't reported the outburst. What would have been the point? HR was a revolving door, and complaints like hers usually ended up in some forgotten inbox. But things at St. Mary's were shifting. Subtle at first. Department heads got urgent emails, Greaves started taking phone calls in a whisper, and whispers turned into rumors. "Did you hear about the board visit next week? Someone big's coming in, real big." Angela didn't think much of it. She was too tired, too focused on staying afloat. Until Thursday, when her badge stopped working at the main entrance. A security guard had to buzz her in. Weird. Then came the email. Mandatory staff meeting, 3 p.m., auditorium, all personnel required. At 3:05 p.m., the auditorium was full. Nurses, doctors, even janitorial staff stood shoulder to shoulder. Everyone murmured, curious. Then the back door opened, and in walked Thomas Edwards. No hospital gown, no crutches, just a sharp black suit and a face everyone in corporate healthcare had seen at least once on the cover of Forbes. Mouths dropped, phones came out, someone audibly gasped. Dr. Greaves paled. "Good afternoon," Edwards said, calmly stepping up to the podium. Silence. "My name is Thomas Edwards. I am the CEO of Healthcare United, the organization that owns and oversees this facility." He paused. Eyes scanned the room. His voice stayed calm, but underneath there was fire. "For the past few weeks, I have been recovering in this very hospital under observation. Not medical observation, but operational. You could hear a pin drop. I witnessed firsthand behavior and treatment that not only goes against our company's values, but violates basic human decency. I saw a culture that tolerates exclusion, punishes initiative, and protects egos over ethics." Dr. Greaves looked like he wanted to disappear. Gasps, heads turned. Angela froze. "I saw her disrespected, overworked, silenced. And still, she showed up. Still, she saved a patient's life while others stood by. That's leadership. That's excellence. And that's exactly what this hospital needs more of." He stepped away from the mic. "Effective immediately, we are launching a full investigation into internal practices, starting with the conduct of senior staff. There will be accountability." The room erupted into murmurs, some shocked, some angry, some hopeful. Then one more announcement. "Angela Parker, please see me after this meeting." Angela stood in the empty hallway like she'd just walked out of a dream. The CEO of the entire company had called her out, by name, in front of everyone. She didn't know whether to cry or run. Thomas greeted her with a warm smile. "You good?" "I think so," she managed. "Look," he said, "I know this is a lot, but I need you to know. I didn't come here planning to find you, but I'm really glad I did." She blinked. "Why?" "Because you're proof the system can change, if we back the right people. Then he handed her a folder. Inside, a proposal. Not just any promotion, a new role, Chief Diversity Officer, with the authority to implement training, rewrite protocols, and lead the change from the inside. Angela stared at it. Why me? Because you've already been doing the job without the title. Change is never smooth. The day after the announcement, Graves went on leave. Some of the nurses who'd ignored Angela suddenly wanted to be her friend. Others kept their distance, resentful, whispering about quotas and corporate politics. Angela didn't care. She had a job to do. The first weeks were brutal. Every meeting was a battlefield. Older doctors pushed back, middle managers rolled their eyes. One even walked out mid-training. But Angela didn't waver. She shared stories, real stories from real staff. She brought in third-party equity consultants. She rebuilt the mentorship program from scratch, pairing new nurses with senior allies. She even sat down with the janitorial team, the people no one ever asked for feedback, and gave them a voice in policy meetings. One day, someone taped a note to her door, "You actually listen." It took months, but slowly things began to change. Patient satisfaction scores went up. Nurse retention improved. The staff lounge, once a cold, silent place, buzzed with actual laughter. Angela started hosting weekly open-door hours, where anyone from interns to surgeons could drop in and talk. No judgments, no filters. New hires were given diversity and bias training before they even touched a chart. Promotion boards now included diverse reviewers. HR complaints didn't get buried anymore. Angela still faced resistance, but she was no longer alone, because stories spread and people watched. And one person speaking out became 10, then 50, then a hospital, and then other hospitals started calling. Other Healthcare United facilities started reaching out. Can we model our program after yours? Would you be willing to train our leadership team? Could you come speak at our regional conference? Angela flew to cities she'd never seen, stood on stages she never imagined, spoke to thousands about what it means to be heard and what it costs to stay silent. She talked about what happened, not to shame, but to teach, and always, in every speech, she ended the same way. I wasn't special, I was just tired, and I decided to do something about it. But the change didn't start with me. It started the moment someone with power decided to use it for good. And somewhere in the back of the room, Thomas Edwards always smiled. A year later, Angela walked back into the same break room where no one would sit with her. Now, her picture hung on the wall. Employee of the Year, Angela Parker, for courage, compassion, and change. She didn't need applause or speech, but she did sit down across from a new nurse. Fresh scrubs, nervous eyes. Same story. "Hey," Angela said, smiling. "How's your first day going?" The nurse blinked, surprised. Okay. I think kind of overwhelming." Angela nodded. "It gets better. And if it doesn't, come find me." Angela thought the worst was behind her. She'd climbed the hill, fought the fight, and finally stood in a place of influence. But leadership? Real leadership has a strange way of revealing the truth about people, especially when power starts to shift. Some of the very same staff who smiled to her face now whispered in corners. A few quietly resisted changes by dragging their feet on new policy enforcement. A few even escalated their complaints to legal. Anonymous ones. "She's promoting division. She's targeting staff unfairly. She's just trying to make this about race." Angela knew this wouldn't be easy, but she hadn't expected the loneliness that came with leading reform in a place still allergic to accountability. She stayed focused, not perfect, focused. Late nights reviewing incident logs, weekends reading bias training manuals. She even started therapy, not because she was falling apart, but because she refused to. And slowly, she built her own kind of army. Not loud, not flashy, but real. The nurses who had once stayed quiet started speaking up. Residents began proposing more inclusive practices in their rotations. A security officer pulled her aside one day just to say, "Thank you." Small wins, but real ones. Here, the hospital faced a patient safety audit, the kind that makes boardrooms sweat. A board-certified consultant team came in unannounced. Clipboard inspections, real-time protocol tests, interviews with staff. And one of those consultants? Dr. Javier Mendoza, Latino, Harvard-trained, former ER chief, and someone who didn't play games. Angela expected the usual checklist nonsense, but Javier stayed late after every meeting, asked real questions. What's it like being you here? What's changed since last year? What hasn't? He wasn't just there to judge, he was there to learn and to listen. At the end of the week, he called a private meeting. "You're doing something rare," he told her, "and it's working. Not fast, not perfect, but it's real. I'd like to help." That help came in the form of a grant, $500,000, 0 cents for internal equity innovation, courtesy of the Healthcare Innovation Fund. Angela used it to launch a mentorship program, build out a mobile diversity unit, and develop a new conflict resolution framework, the kind that didn't end in retaliation or silence. Javier? He became a board advisor. And just like that, she wasn't the only voice in the room anymore. You asked what happened to Dr. William Greaves. He didn't just vanish. Not entirely. For months, he was on administrative leave, which really meant the legal team was figuring out how to minimize the fallout. Turns out Angela wasn't the first nurse he'd humiliated. She wasn't even the 10th. When the investigation files were unsealed, and they were, a full report was published in the company's transparency portal. 43 separate internal complaints, 12 settlements, multiple violations of professional conduct. One of the cases, a young Asian nurse named Grace had left the profession entirely after Greaves had sabotaged her rotation reviews. When the media caught wind, things spiraled fast. Greaves was officially terminated for cause. His medical license was later suspended after a review board found gross negligence in multiple patient interactions. He tried to sue, claimed defamation. He lost. Angela never celebrated, that wasn't her style. But when she saw Grace in the news, not as a victim, but now as a nursing educator at a local college, she smiled. Because healing doesn't always look like justice. Sometimes it just looks like someone getting their life back. After her third keynote speaking engagement, Angela realized something. This wasn't just about St. Mary's anymore. What happened there, the culture, the transformation, the resistance, it was a reflection of healthcare everywhere, and people were hungry for something different. She began consulting part-time. Hospitals from across the country flew her in, not to check a box, but to learn how to build something real. Her motto was simple. It's not about making everyone comfortable, it's about making sure everyone is safe. She taught senior leadership how to recognize unconscious bias without getting defensive. She coached HR departments on actually following through. She taught frontline staff how to report without fear. And in every room, every city, she carried the same message. I wasn't a hero. I was just tired of pretending it was normal. Years passed. St. Mary's wasn't perfect, no place ever is, but it was different, better. New staff were greeted warmly, evaluated fairly. Patients felt seen, not just treated. The walls no longer echoed with silence when a black nurse spoke up. Now her words carried weight. Angela eventually moved into a national leadership role, but every year she returned for 1 week, quietly, just to walk the halls, visit the break room, catch up with her old team. One year, during her visit, she saw a familiar scene. A young nurse. Nervous, first day, messy locker. She was about to say something, but someone else beat her to it. A middle-aged nurse with a clipboard smiled and said, "Hey, first day? I'll show you around." Angela didn't interrupt. She just watched. Because the goal was never for people to remember her. The goal was for them to remember what she stood for. 10 years later, Healthcare United's annual Innovation Summit held a special tribute. Angela Parker, honored for her work in transforming institutional culture across over 30 hospitals. The award was named after her, the Parker Principle, for leadership through integrity. She stepped on stage. Humbled, gray now touched her temples. Her voice had a little more gravel, but it was stronger than ever. "I didn't want to change the system," she said. "I just wanted to survive it, and in trying to survive, I ended up changing it anyway." She paused. "But don't clap for me. Clap for the next person who speaks up. Clap for the nurse who notices what others ignore. Clap for the patient who dares to ask for better. Because that's where the next chapter begins." If you thought Angela's story was powerful, wait until you hear what happened in the emergency room when a paramedic refused to leave a homeless man behind. Hit that subscribe button. We've got more that'll shake you. And stick around. Because this one changes everything. In the years that followed, Angela's name became more than just a name in the healthcare world. It became a conversation starter. Hospitals referenced the Angela model when discussing workplace reform. Nursing schools built modules around what she'd pioneered. Her name became synonymous with pushing through the noise and making it matter. But all of that, it didn't come from a title, or even from Thomas Edwards' intervention. It came from one single truth. She didn't look away. She could have ignored the patient's crashing vitals that day, could have played it safe, let someone else take the fall, but she didn't. And that courage, the kind that costs you something, that's what rewrote the story. And let's be real, the system didn't suddenly become perfect overnight. Racism didn't disappear, bias didn't dissolve, but something happened that mattered just as much. People stopped pretending it wasn't there. That's where real change begins. Not in silence, but in the uncomfortable honesty that makes people shift in their seats. About 5 years into her national role, Angela got an email. Subject line, "Your story changed my life." It was from a nurse named Kira, from a small hospital in rural Georgia. She was the only black RN in her entire department. She'd almost quit twice. Then, one night, scrolling through YouTube after another rough shift, she saw a video. Dr. Humiliates black nurse in front of patient, unaware of who the patient really is. And she watched, and re-watched. She printed Angela's quote, the one about surviving the system, and taped it inside her locker. Then she started speaking up. And when her supervisor tried to push her out, Kira documented everything. She used Angela's exact reporting framework. She stayed calm, consistent, and when the investigation began, it wasn't just her voice anymore. The story went viral internally. That hospital didn't just issue a public apology. They asked Kira to help design their new onboarding and equity program. She wrote to Angela just to say, "You made me feel like I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't weak for being tired, that maybe I could be part of the change too." Angela read it 3 times. Then she cried. Not out of sadness, but because she knew the ripple was still moving. At a major national healthcare leadership conference in D.C., Angela was invited as the keynote speaker. The room was packed. Suits, lanyards, people who made billion-dollar decisions with a swipe of a finger. Angela stepped to the podium. She didn't read from notes, didn't use slides. Instead, she told a story. She told them about the first day at St. Mary's, about the cold shoulders, the gaslighting, the humiliation. She spoke about grieves, not to smear, but to expose the disease in the system, unchecked ego protected by silence. She talked about the night she thought about quitting, really quitting. And then she told them about the moment she realized that speaking up wasn't just about her, that silence would cost more than her pride, it might cost lives. Then she looked out into the crowd and said, "Leadership isn't about titles. It's about who you choose to be when no one is clapping, when no one is watching, when speaking up means losing something or gaining everything." The crowd rose to their feet. And for the first time in a long time, Angela didn't feel like she was fighting alone. It started as a bold idea. What if a hospital was built around equity, from the ground up? No legacy culture, no "we've always done it this way." Thomas Edwards came to her with a plan, not just a rebrand, a new facility, a flagship institution that modeled what healthcare could be when humanity led the way. Angela didn't hesitate. She joined as executive advisor and helped design everything: hiring practices, floor layouts, patient intake protocols, employee wellness programs, even cafeteria policies. They called it Haven General. The name wasn't just poetic, it was literal. At Haven, there were no blind spots. Every voice mattered. Disciplinary actions were reviewed by multiracial panels, promotions were data-checked for fairness, and mentorship wasn't optional, it was expected. Angela visited every week, not to oversee, but to listen, because leadership, she believed, wasn't about being in charge, it was about being accountable. Years later, Angela sat down for a rare TV interview. The host asked a question she'd never been asked before. If you could go back and speak to yourself on that first day at St. Mary's, what would you say? Angela paused, long enough that the silence got uncomfortable. Then she said, "I'd tell her that the world was going to try to convince her she didn't belong. That every sideways glance, every subtle dig, every silent room would try to shrink her down. But I'd also tell her, don't you dare. Because one day, that same silence, it'll turn into applause. And the ones who dismissed you, they'll say they always believed in you. But the truth is, you believed in you first. And that was enough." The clip went viral. Nurses across the country clipped that final quote and turned it into posters, t-shirts, even tattoos. Angela didn't ask for fame, but she didn't hide from it either, because if her visibility gave someone else the courage to stay one more day, it was worth it. Angela retired at 62, not because she had to, but because she finally could. She left knowing the house she'd built would keep standing without her, that the nurses coming behind her wouldn't have to beg for dignity, that the whispers had been replaced by open conversations, and that the next Angela wouldn't have to fight the same way she did. At her retirement dinner, the auditorium was packed. From janitors to board members, from interns to CEOs. One by one, people got up and shared what Angela had meant to them. A young Latina nurse said, "Because of her, I speak up when I see something wrong." A trans medical assistant said, "She gave me space to be who I am without fear." Even Dr. Mendoza said, "I've worked in 100 hospitals, but I only saw one truly change, and it's because of Angela Parker." Then, at the end, Thomas Edwards stood up. He walked to the front holding a velvet box. "We don't usually do this," he said, "but for Angela, we're making an exception." He opened the box. Inside, a gold pin engraved with 4 words, "Because you showed up." Angela's hands trembled as she held it, and for once, she didn't have words, just tears. Angela's final message to her staff was printed and framed on the walls of Haven General. It read, "Never underestimate the impact of one brave moment. Systems don't change on their own, people do. So when you see something wrong, don't ask, 'Why me?' Ask, 'What happens if I stay silent?' and then speak up anyway." Because maybe, just maybe, the next patient watching from the corner might have the power to change everything. Inspired by Angela's story? Watch the next video on your screen. It's about a janitor who uncovered a hospital secret no one was supposed to find.